and hello everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Beating the Forgetting Curve, a behavioral science approach to knowledge retention. My name is Ann Parker and I'm Associate Director of Talent Leader Consortiums at ATD. I'm pleased to be moderating today's webinar for TD leaders. ATD recently launched a new multimedia publication brand called Talent Development Leader. TD Leader fosters and promotes the thought leadership of people like you who are influencing the talent development field. You can learn more at www.td.org/TDL. To kick us off today, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Sounding Board. Sounding Board empowers forward-thinking companies to bridge leadership gaps at all levels. They ensure that both organizations and employees thrive in a global marketplace marked by disruption and continuous change. Join their people-first partners like Intel, EY, and Cloudera as they chart a new path forward, reimagining how companies should invest in talent to bridge today's leadership gaps and shape the leaders of tomorrow. You can learn more at www.soundingboardinc.com, and I shared that link in the chat. And now I'm happy to introduce our fabulous presenter, Iyad Yaqub. Iyad leads behavioral science at Sounding Board. His mission is to connect science to practice and tell evidence-based stories to fuel the company's growth. He led L&D and people programs for 3 multi-billion-dollar tech startups and designed nationally recognized coaching and data insights interventions at Stanford, Purdue, and the UN. He did his master's and doctoral research in organizational behavior, management, and psychology at Purdue, USF, and Harvard. Iyad is also a fellow at the Harvard Institute of Coaching, a Fulbright Scholar, and a certified coach. We are very lucky to have Iyad here with us today, and with that, I'm happy to hand it over to him.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Dylan. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. This is Iyad, he, him. I live in Walnut Creek, California, and today's conversation is near and dear to my heart. And we're going to talk about how we actually beat the forgetting curve to sustain knowledge and memory and all things related to behaviors using behavioral science as an approach. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let's go, and I'll show you my face first. So this is me from sunny Walnut Creek, California. So hi, everyone. And I'm going to go off camera, and I'm going to share my screen right now. So here you go. So can you all see my screen? Cool. Let's see here. So if I can make sure I see the chat as well. Perfect. And here you go. Perfect. And I'm going to see here. All right, so you're sharing screen. Slideshow. All right, perfect. All right, yeah, so we have people from everywhere. Indiana, I used to live in Indiana, West Lafayette, and we see Wisconsin, we see Michigan, we see Texas. So yeah, amazing. Palestine, beautiful. Portland. All right, let's start. So our agenda is very simple and very direct. And so basically what we're going to talk about, what is the forgetting curve and how we best combat it. Then we can drive greater knowledge retention through holistic approaches to learning and development. And last, we're going to kind of think about how we can assist our employees and leaders in applying knowledge gained through training to their daily work. So it's all about sustaining impact and beyond just training and development. So I'm going to go ahead and start. This is me. So thank you, Anne, for the intro. And let's start with the forgetting curve by Ebbinghaus. So basically, this notion is the forgetting curve. It's an old concept. It's conceptualized by Hermann Ebbinghaus, a social psychology scientist. And it's a critical concept that it's all about learning and development. Leaders basically in this context should consider in their training strategies. And it demonstrates how memory retention decreases over time in an exponential manner, implying that learners are likely to forget a significant portion of new information within days or weeks, unless they're consciously trying to review it. So as you can see here, is that kind of you start with 80% and goes to 80%, 100%, then 80%, then 60% over the days. And after like 7 days, all the way to 30 days, you retain about 20% of the knowledge of what you learned on day one. So this is you can perceive it in multiple ways, but mainly the whole concept here that knowledge is not going to stay the same. Intuitively, we know that, but when it comes to common practice, we're not intentional about how most of the times about how we can beat this forgetting curve. And whatever we do, usually people lose over the time. So what can we do here? So that's kind of what we're trying to solve for, is how we can beat the forgetting curve using behavioral science, a multimodality approach, using a collection of sciences together to achieve the desired result. Now let's start with the why. Why do we forget? So from a neurobiologically speaking, we know the system one, system two, the dual theory approach, which is basically Don Kahneman in his book and the Thinking Fast and Slow and other behavioral scientists talked about it. And basically that most of the times we think unconsciously in a fast, automatic, autopilot, intuitive way. And very, very rarely we think in a slow, logical, effortful way. And this is because we want to economize on energy, because we cannot make deliberate decisions all the time. So imagine the conscious mind is the person who's riding the elephant. This is like a Jonathan Haidt talked about this analogy, that the conscious mind is more the person who is driving this or riding this elephant, and the subconscious mind is the elephant, which is 90% of the times from a size wise. So what do we do here? What do we do here in terms of forgetting? Well, what happens with basically when we make fast decisions, we lose them fast. So I use the analogy of computers. If you think about, there are mainly three different types of memories in computers. We have the cache memory, and we have the RAM, the random access memory, and we have the ROM, or we can have the hard drive. And if something doesn't stay in the hard drive, usually we forget it. But if it stays in the RAM and the cache, the fast memory is super fast, is super responsive. That's why we browse fast, we respond fast. That's why, because the answers are in the working memory, the active memory. But when it goes to the hard drive and we want to retrieve something, it takes a longer time. So efficiency is what we're solving for, but this is what is impacting our forgetting curve, and this is how we retain less information over the time. So when it comes to what valuable information we want to retain, we have to retain them in the permanent long memory, which is the hard drive in this context, which is kind of basically how we want to retain it. Is going to take a slower time, but it's going to sustain for a longer time. So how to combat it? Immediately, let's go for it. We talked about the what, the forgetting curve, the why. Now let's talk about the how. The how here, we chose this framework, we came up with it simply to make the combating strategy super practical in the context of learning and development in the workplace, especially when it comes to leaders and managers and employees in general. So we call it the triple E's. Simply just make your learning super efficient, super effective, and super engaging. How do you do that? So what does that mean? Let's double click on each one of them. So efficient, what we mean by efficient is efficiency when it comes to time and efficiency when it comes to content. So when it comes to time, most of the times when we think about learning and efficiency, we think about the content, and we think about the time from a template perspective. You say, let's have a one. I'm sorry if is he I cannot see. I'm sorry. Do people see where I'm presenting? Because some people say I'm not. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Okay. All right. got scared here. All right, so all right. So what I'm saying here is that from an efficiency of time, we live in a world right now where learning with a capital L is not learning that we're thinking about when we think of in the context of learning and development. When we browse, social media, for example, most videos are less than 20 minutes. YouTube videos, the YouTube effect, we're talking about very, very short videos. We're talking about very simple language. We're talking about the super direct to the point. We're talking about super micro content. We're talking about a lot of things here. And 20 minutes in the workplace sounds like is the right amount of the balance between what you would like to deliver and the capacity of people to absorb and retain and beat the forgetting curve. So whatever you provide after 20 minutes, it might have a law, kind of the effect of the law of diminishing returns, and people will retain less after 20 minutes. So think about it this way. If I can deliver something in 1 hour, what can I do to deliver the same content in 20 minutes, controlling for content? And what can I do to deliver what I want to deliver in 20 minutes and not more than 20 minutes? So from an actual investment of capacity of knowledge and the knowledge you're providing or the skills you're training people on are not necessarily is all about adding more. More is not better when it comes to learning. More actually has a negative effect, usually after 20 minutes. And there are a lot of theories and there's a debate about what is the maximum amount, what is the optimal amount. But in the workplace, think about your workplace. Think about the leaders you're trying to serve. Think about the kind of the time of the day and the time of the week and the time of the quarter and the time of the year. What is ideal for them? And you simply start by asking them what is ideal for you that you can fit in the context of your work, that it doesn't give you that feeling that you're losing work, or you have this FOMO effect, that fear of missing out. Think also about content. Usually, even if you have a 20 minutes, but you're putting a lot of content in 20 minutes, people will still lose some of the content they're learning, and they will forget that after the 20 minutes. So I am a big fan of the power of three, with three ideas only in 20 minutes. And usually, because people will remember 3 minutes, and there's tons of research, we can send you that later, but the power of visual focus and how people retain things in three bullets or 3 points or 3 ideas, and things like that. So that's what I'm trying to do here and walk in the talk, is think about 3 things you can do to combat and beat the forgetting curve, is of being efficient, being effective, and being engaging. Let's move forward from an effectiveness perspective. So efficiency is basically achieving results with less resources. Effectiveness is about achieving results and achieving them consistently and achieving them measurably. So what does effectiveness mean when it comes to combating the forgetting curve? The 3 things that came to mind that we found that are very consistent across the board. To make learning effective, think about how you can make it practical, how to make it the moment that people learn something, they immediately know how to use it and how to do it. And the best way to do that is to start with the why, start also build the how and the what. Usually people crave for context, but also they crave for practicality and simplicity. So the more practical the training, the more likely people will apply it, and the more likely people will apply it, that would engage more senses, and that will basically combat the forgetting curve. The second thing is about context. So when I worked in L&D and I used to lead L&D programs, we noticed that we bring um, we talk about models and frameworks and best practices and evidence based and all those things. But when it comes to the workplace, that's why basically becoming the art of learning and development is what is your context? What is the capital C of learning? It's not about content, it's about context. And when they say content is king, context is the kingdom, is think about what does that mean in my organization? What does that look like? Think about any framework we use in learning and development, whether it's for communication, for one-on-ones, for feedback, for coaching, for whatever that is. Think contextually. And what does that look like in my organization? And think about the subcontext or the sub departments. The same framework could look like and perceive differently for the sales leaders or for the engineering leaders or the G&A leaders. Is what does that look like from their using their perspectives? A last one, to make learning effective, make it ongoing. What does ongoing mean? Well, ongoing could mean different things and based on resources, but ongoing is not necessarily it has to be every single day. It doesn't have to be time consuming for learning designers and the curriculum builders or L&D leaders, or for the clients, internal clients. Ongoing could be just keeping the momentum where learning is not an event, but it's more like a commitment to achieve certain results. um, think about social media as an effectiveness tool. Think about from an effectiveness perspective. Think about how we learn from social media. We have YouTube, for example. YouTube usually is when we watch a YouTube video, we watch it, then we like it, and then we subscribe, and then we comment. We can probably share it, right? That's like a learning activity. That sounds a learning activity, right? Then, if you really are interested in what they're talking about, imagine any, let's say, podcast or longer format of learning, could be an hour or more. Um, a lot of YouTube videos that go viral or podcasts on YouTube or any learning, they create two versions of the same content. They have the macro version of that and they have the micro version of that, and I call it the nano version of that, which is like a 1 minute or even 30 seconds, something that you don't have to think about it. And I'm going to spend just 1 minute with from a neuroscience perspective why learning has to be macro and micro at the same time. So there's this concept where they call it the extrapersonal and the peripersonal. The extrapersonal basically is like anything that outside yourself and outside your surrounding. And this is something when you need to pursue something. This is something that requires motivation and dopamine to achieve. And the best example is when you try to achieve goals and when you want to attain goals, right? That's extrapersonal. That's outside your surrounding and outside your body and outside your brain. And if you think about the peripersonal, peri means surrounding, which is anything that doesn't require any pursuit, any dopamine, any motivation. So, for example, if you're sitting next to me and I say, "Can you give me this piece of paper?" So you just need to kind of just give me the paper. Your brain won't perceive this request or task as an extra personal, or perceive it as more peripersonal. If I ask you, can you do this task, or can you even physically go and do something that requires you to move, and then that would be extra personal. That's kind of basically what I think about learning from that perspective. Think about extra personal, that anything that requires deliberate thinking, requires dopamine and motivation, and peripersonal, anything that requires there is no requirement. It's in your surrounding. There is no motivation. Macro learning is more extra personal. Micro learning is more peripersonal. And that's kind of how you make effective learning or make learning more effective, is how to balance micro and macro, and how to be aware and intentional about how I can embed learning in the peripersonal space. So for people not to, they don't need to go and do something. It's like you heard about this term, learning in the flow of work. In my brain, I see it as like there's a go strategy and grow strategy, right? That people are in two modes. Go, I'm doing work. Grow, I'm learning. There's no work. And this is how people see it from a binary way of thinking. But if we can break this perspective, break this binary way of thinking, and think about how I can grow in the flow of go and how I can go in the flow of grow. I'm doing work because I need to grow as a person, and I'm learning because I need to be more productive and increase my performance and achieve my goals. And that's where I feel like embedding learning as a in a pretty personal space. So for people not don't need any motivation and they don't have to leave their peripersonal space to achieve that. And this is how social media successfully was able to do it, is through micro learning or super short bite size, or even now they call kind of even shorter than that, right? All right, moving forward, the last one, and before we go there, this is the forgetting curve again, and how we can think about it from a counter effect is that first learning happens at the 80% or 100%. Then after that, it drops immediately after 1 hour. If you can see here, the less than 40%, so after 1 hour. And then after that, it goes to after 1 day to 20%. It keeps going, going down. So the best way is to meet people where they forget the most and try to combat that by reviewing what we just learned. So the same thing after like 1 day, and same thing after 1 week, and you can see the drop is not as steep at when it started, because when you review something, you will retain more. So after like 1 month, you can retain 100% of what you learned if there is an intentional, systematic, ongoing learning happening, and it's again, if it's practical and contextual. All right. So moving forward, the last one is engaging. Now we know that intuitively we want to make learning engaging, otherwise people will forget. And I love this quote by, the famous quote by Descartes would say, I think, therefore I am. I love what John Seely Brown, JSB, what he says, I engage, therefore I am. Engagement is the social learning manifestation of learning. It's like when they're engaged, people learn when they're engaged with their environment and with their surrounding. So what does that look like? So there are two perspectives here. One, we call it the 85% rule, which is actually a very, very, very recent research published in Nature Journal. It's called the 85% rule for optimal learning, which is basically, this rule suggests that growth will be maximized when we practice tasks we can succeed at roughly 4/5 of the time. So basically, what does that mean? Like, is if I give you a test and you solve this test like by 100%, this is probably like a result. This is probably too easy for you. And if you have 80% correct or 70% correct, that's probably a bit too hard for you. The optimal learning from this perspective is that you solve up to 85% plus minus, one standard deviation here. So this is the difficulty. We think this is optimal learning for humans and for machines from a machine learning perspective. The analogy I use, basically, when you go to the gym and let's say you do like bench press and the weight is about, let's say you about like 20 pounds, and you feel that's 20 pounds, usually on a scale from 1 to 10, the pain is about, let's say, 10. This is way too heavy for you. If it's 10, the pain is like really, really painful. And if the pain is about 4 or 5, this is probably too light for you. So if the pain is about, some trainers say on a scale from 1 to 10, how much pain do you feel? Say, well, I feel like about 7 or 8. This is like from this learning perspective, challenging your muscles. That would be the optimal weight for you. Same thing from a learning perspective and difficulty and challenging. Think about what does that mean in the real work environment, and how we can actually achieve it intentionally, and how much content difficulty has to be attuned kind of basically for people to learn. And last is the ABC model, which is basically psychology is built on this aspect of the ABC, which is affect, behavior, and cognition. Affect is your feelings, behavior, your actions, and cognition is your thinking, your ideas. And if you want people to actually learn, you have to touch the three in a way or another. Some people add the D, which is drive, which is your motivation, and some people embed that in the other three here. So think about what is the drive for people to learn something, and how you can involve their feelings and ideas and behaviors. Otherwise, if you only over index on thinking and models and frameworks and understanding things, but there are no emotions, no stories, then people will forget. And if it's only story driven, like and there's no ideas, no frameworks and mental models, people will also forget things. And last, if you have these two, but you don't have behavioral focused approach on how people actually will behave based on your new learning, then again, that would not gonna be sufficient here. So if we want to make learning efficient, involve stories, have mental models and frameworks, and try to have a behavioral focus and impact. Think about mindset, think about skill set, and think about tool sets. All right, so this is kind of where we are today. This is a famous theory about learning, that learning, there are three different types of learning. We have pedagogy, which is assisted learning, andragogy, what we call adult learning. Very few people talk about heutagogy, which is coming from heuristics, which is called self-determined learning, which is really, really cool to think about learning as from a self-determination theory. And if you're aware of the self-determination theory, it's all about how people actually become intrinsically motivated to do something. And it's based on autonomy, based on growth, and based on sense of relatedness. And if you want to make learning effective, efficient, and engaging, think about self-determination as a guiding principle instead of assisted learning or adult learning, which are basically theories are still exist in so many ways. But in the workplace, when it comes to behavioral learning or even technical functional learning, think about what does self-determination mean, and how can I actually implement that in my organization? How can I give more agency and autonomy to my learners so they can learn and be more effective and engaged? The theory here that before 25, when we turn 25, uh, pedagogy is assisted learning, so you have more instructor control. Andragogy, more like adult learning, which is you can self-directed based on their own motivation. But heutagogy is basically self-determination after 25. You actually can still learn effectively and efficiently, but it has to be coming from people's motivation internally. And that's kind of where giving people that sense of agency and autonomy, that would be really effective. Okay, again, same theory. The more you go up, the more autonomy needed, and the more you go down, the more structure needed. All right, cool. So last thing about behaviors, we're talking about behaviors, and this is also a framework that from my mentor, BJ Fogg at Stanford University, where they talk about that behavior happens when motivation meets abilities, and when people are prompted, the behavior actually will going to happen. So let's say, assume that if I ask you to donate $1 to your favorite charity, on a scale from 1 to 10 or low to high, probably you're going to say high. I'm motivated to do it. And on this scale of ability, from hard to do to easy to do, you're probably going to say, yes, that's easy to do. Probably, right? So $1 to your favorite charity. However, if I ask you to donate $1 million, right? Unless if you're like a multimillionaire or billionaire, that might be really, really difficult to do, even if you're still motivated to do that, right? And if I ask you to donate $1 to an organization that doesn't represent your values and you're not interested in, even $1, you're going to say probably low motivation to do it, even if you can do it. So think about it this way. If you want to activate behaviors, and you're all aware of Kirkpatrick model, you start with, satisfaction and then learning, then behaviors. We're talking about the behavioral layer here of Kirkpatrick. If you think about it this way, if I want to see behavioral change in the organization, I want to make something really easy to do. And I have to have some high motivation, mid to high motivation, so I can beat this behavioral action or threshold, and I can see the activation threshold happening here. Still, you need to prompt people, the nudges, right? So where to start? Is it a chicken or egg problem? Is it I start with the ability or motivation? Well, based on this theory and this framework and this, perspective, and again, I love this quote is all models are wrong, but some are useful. I think this model is useful if you think about it from an ability perspective, making something really easy to do, back to being efficient, effective, and engaging. And then, even if you have low motivation to do something, which we just talked about self-determination and motivation to do something, then you can actually see some behavioral change. And when you prompt people, which is so important to do, and a lot of people over-index on nudging and notifications. Notifications have neutral or even negative impact here, where they become like perceived as annoying and distracting if people are not they don't have the ability or motivation to do something. So you have to be in this area here in order to have some behavioral change when you prompt people. Okay? So think about it this way. I want to see behavioral change, not just knowledge retention, but also I need to do that consistently. So I have to have a system where motivation is low to medium, and then I have a really easy things to do, super easy. So when I prompt people, that I see some success and behavioral change. Okay, let's see about time. So we're almost about time here. Last thing about ability, we just talked about ability here. What does ability mean? Just quickly think about multidimensional: time, money, physical effort, mental effort, routine. So let's say you approach a sales team and or go to market team toward the end of the quarter. That would be probably, time ability problem, right? Or mental effort problem, right? Or imagine if you're training people physically and they just finish a physical training, that from a physical effort perspective, this is hard, so they don't have the ability. Think about resources and money. Maybe people like when toward the end of the month, maybe, or mid-month, they cannot afford to buy something, so they don't have the ability. Mental effort, again, make it super efficient and easy from a time and content perspective, and make it more engaging, so it doesn't require a lot of mental effort and it's not emotionally or cognitively taxing. All right, so I'll stop here for a second, see if you have a quick question. We're going to have 15 minutes toward the end for questions and answers, but now we're going to move to a case study. But before I go to the case study, I'm going to go and just review quickly what we just talked about. So to just walk the talk here, we said forgetting curve, people forget information over the time, up to 80% over the period after 1 week. And to combat that, that's because our brain economizes on energy. To combat that, we make our learning more efficient, effective, and engaging. Efficient means from a time perspective, make it less than 20 minutes. And content perspective, use the law of 3 or power of 3. To make learning effective, make it contextual, related to the work environment and exactly relevant to what people do. Practical, super easy to do, and ongoing. So it's not an event, it's a momentum. And last thing, makes engaging learning engaging by using the 85% rule and using the ABC of psychology. Use emotions, ideas, which is thinking, and behavior, which is action. Cool. So let's go back here and talk about a case study. So if this is for you now to kind of be engaged, and let's talk about this case study and what did that mean here for you. So from a case study perspective here, I used to lead learning and development at an organization, and I used to design and deliver leadership development and training programs for leaders. So one program I delivered was a leadership development program for new managers. It was a 5-week program, 5 modules for 20 new managers. And the focus was more basically management skills and leadership skills. 101, how to run 101 was one of the module, how to provide feedback, how to achieve your goals and OKRs, how to be a coaching manager, and all those things. So now, using what we learned today, we're combating the forgetting curve, is how we can make this training program more effective, more engaging, and more efficient. So let's start with making this training more efficient. I'm gonna throw something here, a surprising fact. Do you have any idea, or do you know what is the average NPS for corporate learning and development today? My question is, what is the average NPS, Net Promoter Score, for learning or corporate learning and development? And if you are aware of that, it starts from minus 100 all the way to 100. So 100 is like a perfect. Everybody will promote this training, and it's the answer to the question: how likely would you, or are you going to recommend this training program or this learning program to other people? All right, you're not close. All right, 0, okay, 100, 0, 0. All right, ready? It's minus 25. And the source is something was published, Harvard. Yes, I'm sorry, yeah. And it's minus 25 is really, really, really horrible. I know. And just kind of think about it this way. Minus 25 means people are more likely gonna talk in a bad way about what happened, and they're not gonna tell people what happened in a positive way. So imagine if you're a restaurant, you're probably gonna close your business after like a few months, and that's what's happening. People do not like corporate learning and development based on this research. Now you might find other sources that could have different numbers. So and that's not just from a perception perspective. Let's say the perception is high. Let's think about transfer of learning, which is our context today. What we need is even go beyond that and see behavioral change. So back to the question here, people really love the training that I delivered. My NPS was actually plus 30, which is awesome. I felt I'm, superhero, but I didn't see any behavioral change. And this is a moment of vulnerability here. So what do I do here? So think about a similar situation in your organization where people might love the training and the learning initiative and intervention, but you're not seeing any knowledge transfer, or very, very little, or you're not seeing any behavioral change. That's not like what you want to see, but that's happening. What can you do to make the training more efficient, more effective, and more engaging? Let's start with more efficient. What can you do to make a leadership development training program for managers for 5 weeks more efficient? Let's see here. Here with coaching, connected with day-to-day function, real case study. Remember what we shared today from a content and time. So let's start with time. What do we do from a time perspective? Much shorter. Remove unnecessary background information. Micro learning. Okay, short 20-minute sessions. Beautiful. Straight to the point. 20 minutes, short sessions. Can I ask you, how many of you actually do 20 minutes training sessions or learning sessions? Anybody? Never. Yep. I do. Okay. So some people they actually do it. Okay, perfect. 40 minutes. How likely you're going to try to do a learning session, like a 1-hour learning session, to make it a 20-minute learning session? Just from a time perspective, we didn't change anything else. Okay. Very likely. It's a must. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's talk about content. What can you do from a content perspective? What we share today is the power of three, only three things you can share in one learning session. How likely are you going to do that? Or how are you doing that already? Yeah, 3 to 5. We could do better. Three key takeaways. Yep. 3 to 5. Okay. All right. Nice. Nice. Right. Three is a magical number. Believe me, it's magic because really people, if you do less than three, might not be the best ROI of their time. And if you do more than three, they will forget the fourth one and the fifth one. So start with three, and people will remember three. In sales, they say more stuff, less sales. And same thing with learning. More is less, and less is more. All right. Okay, so let's go to effective. How can you make learning more effective? So we talked about three things: how to make it more practical, and we talked about social media, and we talked about micro learning and macro learning, and we talked about contextual and ongoing. What can you do that you can revamp or upgrade an existing learning program you have to make it more effective using practical, contextual, and ongoing? All right, direct application to real life scenario. PBL methodology. I would love if you can share that, what that means. More follow-up, check-ins after initial training. You're lovely. Peer coaching, break programs, lovely. I like we just 20 minutes, 20 more engaging, three course. Yes, exactly. LCD model. Yeah, there are a lot of modules here that I never heard of, so I would love if you can share that. I'm learning something new here. Thank you. Simplistic, safe zone, amazing. Yes. We haven't, yeah, beautiful. So here's what I did is I asked leaders to provide me the examples and I used the examples as training. As simple as that. So I go to the sales leader, give me a difficult situation and then that you're facing right now. And they gave me that difficult situation. And then I put it as a training example and case study and people start to solve it. Immediately they relate to that. Amazing. It's like magic. So you don't have to bring anything from outside. Just as like Bruce Lee says, is that research your own experience, do what's useful, abandon what's useless, and add essentially what's basically your make it your own. And I really believe in that. Honestly, in today's world, there's too much content. Just it's a content crisis that from the other side of the equation, which is basically it's too much content and it's so distracting, and the brain has to make a lot of decisions. So think about how we can create more clarity and consistency and commitment and competency and confidence, all C's, right? Just to kind of make learning more effective for people. Okay, all right, and think about micro learning and macro learning. Think about, by the way, micro learning and nudges. Again, back to the behavioral change. Do not work if you do not have a macro learning before. You have to have a solid foundation. So think about it. This example: 20-minute session, then immediately to the same day, you send a 2 minutes reminder of or summary of what you just learned in the 20 minutes. The very next day, you send another 2 minutes and you remind people what they learned yesterday. And after 3 days, another 2 minutes. And each 2 minutes, those 2 minutes are uh, more engaging by using the ABC model. Could be a story, could be a framework, could be a YouTube video, could be anything in 2 minutes, which is a very personal space. You don't have to think about 2 minutes, right? All right, last one, how to make learning more engaging. So we talked about the 85% rule. How can you uh, or how many of you already they use the 85% rule? Like how intentional are you when it comes to difficulty of content and delivery? We use 80%. Okay, lovely. Cool. How do you measure it? That's a really interesting thing. It's like, how do you measure that? My boss wants 90%. Yeah, yeah. We want more challenge, right? Yeah. Think about 85%. We're going to share resources with you to learn more from the sources we use today, but think about difficulty. It's not more difficult is not better, and it's super easy. People lose attention. And you probably heard of the theory of the flow, right? The flow perspective, that when challenge and skills are in tune, people are in a flow zone. So 85% will actually make people in flow zone. But 85% is not only the content, it's also the whole context. We talked about abilities. Okay, beautiful. Okay, well, I think we're about now for questions and answers. So again, to review what we just learned today, all right, make learning more efficient, time and content, more learning more effective, contextual, practical, and ongoing, and make learning more engaging, challenging, and use the ABC affect, behavior, and cognition. So if you can put in the chat, the last thoughts is what is the one thing that you learned today that you're gonna go ahead and actually apply today or this week? So what is one thing that you learned today that you're going to go ahead and actually apply today or this week? And if you can put the questions in the chat so our moderator can manage that. So 20 minutes, the ABCs, beautiful. 20 minutes, lovely. Micro learning, power 3, lovely. Wow. Music. Okay. Amazing. All right. I'm going to stop sharing. Before I go, there's something I want to share with you. I work at Sounding Board. Sounding Board is a leader development or dynamic leadership development suite. And we have a lot of products and services, as you're writing here in the chat. So this is an example of how group coaching, we have one-on-one coaching, we have group coaching, mainly we do leadership coaching. That's what we do. And we think about kind of how your organization has an existing training content. And then this is kind of how Leadership Studios, we have the integration and activation. We're happy to talk to you and chat with you about that. But how you can actually focus on drawing out insight from your training sessions and identifying mindset shifts needed to rethink leadership. So that's like the first session. The second session is more about activation. So think about integration as a context tool and activation more like a behavioral tool. So zero in on which leadership behaviors and capabilities need to be activated to put theory into everyday practice. I'm biased. I'm a behavioral scientist, and I love behaviors because I feel like they're the glue. They are the glue between cognitive learning and performance and productivity and organizational outcomes. Behaviors are super important these days. So that's what we're trying to do is talk about the mindset and the behaviors and integrate that into contextually and make it super fun and engaging. All right. If you want to connect with our team, please take scan this code. And yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking, but also reading your chat comments and your engagement here. So appreciate it. I hope that was useful. Now we can start questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. So lots of questions coming in here. Lots use kind of case examples here, so I'll try to get through some of these in the next 12 minutes. So Virginia asks, can you give some examples of how you'd approach a comprehensive training program in a way that breaks it into 20-minute segments? For example, this session was an hour. How would this possibly be a 20-minute session?
Exactly. If you notice, I was done by the three E's in 20 minutes, and the rest is more just learning reinforcement. So everything I said after 20 minutes, you can actually make it, ongoing nudges, prompts, 2 minutes, whatever you want to do after 20 minutes, you actually can do it as micro learning. That's one way. The second way, and or you can break it down into 3 sessions. So instead of having 1 session a week, you can have 2 sessions of 20 minutes a week, or 3 sessions. So, and it's more like layers. They build on each other. So as we know from the fitness industry, and sports psychology is the fastest growing psychology field, if the best of my knowledge, that is every person talks about it's better to exercise 3 times a week, 20-minute sessions or 25 minutes, rather than 1 hour once a week. Same concept, right?
Good, because that's what all I can squeeze in these days. Right,
Exactly.
consistency, right?
Exactly. Exactly what you can squeeze. But do you feel like I have the same negotiation in my brain I have to do if when I would do 1 hour or 20 minutes? It's a different, altogether different mindset.
Absolutely. Yep. Right, more of anyone can find 20 minutes mentality. So again, looking at the 20-minute increments here, what if within a 1 hour session, you break it up with 2 20-minute sessions? Does that yield similar results to, for example, 2 separate 20-minute sessions?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, your NPS will double, right? Unless if it's negative, it's not going to double in a negative way, but it's going to double. It's a guarantee. It happened with me multiple times, and people will actually retain more knowledge, because the happier they are, the more challenged they are, especially the law of three things, right? And then yeah, it's like magic. It's just counterintuitive. It's common sense if you think about it from a fitness perspective, but it's not common sense when it comes to corporate learning and development. And what I say, common sense is not common because it's overpowered by common practice. So
Mm.
think about it this way: what can I do differently that I'm not used to, and it's so weird and so awkward, and people might not like it, but that's probably the where learning happens.
Love that. Speaking of NPS, you mentioned, is there a major difference in results or NPS scores between online versus face-to-face or classroom training? Does modality impact the results?
100%. There was a research study published, I think 2 years ago, about MOOCs and online learning. And it was so eye-opening. And it was a wake-up call that the completion rate for MOOCs was like less than 3%. And was it was surprising, let's say this, put it this way. And some regions, it was even less than that. So people, because you're relying on people motivation and dopamine, and yeah, thank you, Anya. So it's if you're relying on people motivation, remember the behavioral change and behavioral activation. Motivation and dopamine is motivation is dopamine from a neuroscience perspective, and if it's even if it's super easy to do, but it's still not in your personal space, like you still have to do something, and even if it's super engaging, all that, but your motivation is not, even if it's not, if it's like too low to a point where you're not going to be able to do it. So same thing with online learning. If you're not doing this, the triple E's, the 3 E's, efficient, engaging, and effective, people will lose attention after that and lose interest. And you can see a lot of interest at the beginning, then after 3 sessions, usually you can see the drops, and drops. Completion rate is just so bad. So what you need to do here is just think about agnostic and controlling for modalities. People operating system, the same operating system, operate the same way. We need to have some agency as space. We need to have a sense of growth and satisfaction and sense of success and relatedness, sense of community and cohorting. And this is where how we think about learning, whether it's on MOOCs or in person.
Thank you. Here's some similar case examples, and I'll kind of take these together. Maybe you can respond to each, but our programs that we run are typically 1 hour sessions over the span of a quarter. One topic per session broken down into 3 key takeaways. How would you recommend converting that content down into a 20-minute session as you suggest?
Yeah, I would love to do some coaching here and ask more questions. We don't have this luxury here, but the luxury here. But I think I honestly, use your intuition here, and I need to know more about the audience and the goal and again back to the context thing. But I would say like, yeah, whatever comes to mind, what are the most important 3 things that you would like people to walk away with, and 3 behaviors? And you can do that the first 20 minutes and start there. Use a kind of iterative, agile approach. And then say, I'm done with the first module. Let's go to the second thing. What I still like have 3 things people I want them to do in the next 20 minutes. So maybe I think my approach would be think about step 1 and don't think about step 2. Think about module 1 as the only thing you're going to do and say, what are the 3 things? That's just the core things. It's core and more. What are the core things I need to do in the next 20 minutes? And people will walk away with. And then you're done. After that, then think about the next 20 minutes. Think about step 2 and step 3. That might be counterproductive for you.
Another couple of questions were around direct instruction coupled with learning experiences. So for example, would it be okay to do 10 minutes of instruction paired with a 30-minute group activity where participants apply what they've just learned, or would that violate that 20-minute rule? So how do you kind of integrate, learning experience with the instruction?
Yeah. So again, the 20 minutes is not just content. I think I use a 3C model. Again, all C's and D's and E's here, but the 3C model I use here is content, community, coaching. So that's like a basic group coaching is about. There's content we're sharing. There is a community, sense of community, because it's a group, social learning theory, engagement, right? And there's coaching, which is basically, if you think about coaching with a capital C, could be basically asking questions, inquiry, feedback, challenging mindset, challenging behaviors, supporting each other, right? So you can activate the ABCs of psychology. We talked about the ideas, the emotions, and the behaviors in 20 minutes, and you cover 3 points at the same time. So I don't see it either or. The 20-minute thing is very valuable, and it might sound like compared to 1 hour, it's a very short time, but compare it relatively to 2 minutes. You see, oh, 20 minutes, I can do a lot of things. So it's not like an absolute value, it's relative. And last thing here, think about the 20 minutes as a space for you as a designer, a space for you as a development, from a learning and development leader. How can I enjoy the process myself? Because if I enjoy something in 20 minutes, I can transfer the same energy and experience to people in 20 minutes.
Great. We have one more question that came through here, about 3 minutes left in the hour. At the end of some sessions, we ask learners to tell us 3 things they learned and 3 concepts they can apply at their job immediately. They verbalize what they're learning rather than what we're telling them the 3 things they should learn. Is this appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take it to another level and ask them, what did you think before and what are you thinking now? And this shifts, you're bringing awareness to their mindset and what they learned. I used to think, now I think. It's amazing. It's like magic because people start to see that they're learning themselves. It's like a meta learning right now. And at the same time, ask them to commit to a behavior. Because when you ask people to commit to a behavior, there's a bias here happening. It's called the action bias. It says, oh, I would love to actually go and do something and experience that. And I feel like my time wasn't wasted because now I see a sense of success when I actually do it. So 3 takeaways, awesome. Also, what is one behavior you can commit to? So similar to what we did today. And you would find it really easy, especially as a small step. If it's a coaching session, whatever they give you, ask them to make it even smaller. So make it more in the personal space. Always think about personal because you don't need dopamine at the beginning because you haven't built this sense of success yet. So when you start, think about personal, something in your surrounding. Let's say if I talk to you and say I'm committing to go and sign up for this class and take the first module. I might ask you, what is even a smaller step you can do? Say, oh, I'm going to sign up and read one page or listen for 2 minutes. That's awesome. Then you feel like a sense of accomplishment even before you do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Iya. This was incredibly informative, lots of great interaction in the chat and great feedback. 1 minute left here. Any final thoughts, closing comments, charges to the audience?
Yeah, it's a personal story I'm going to share quickly. So I used to run a leadership development program, and the CEO, I always produce reports to my CHRO and the CEO, and they used to love those reports, but they never read them, honestly. They were not as interested as I wanted them to be. However, one day, I asked, the CEO showed up to one of the sessions, and it was a Zoom session. So he joined one of the breakouts, and he asked one of the managers, say, how is this training that Iyad is running? And he said, actually, this training is not only changing me as a manager, but it's changing my life. And because of this sentence, my CEO gave me 2 headcounts and gave me more resources. And because there was one story that activated the emotional part of it. So I think my last takeaway is love. I think love and learning is something really important. Put some love and people will see the love, and you will see learning happening as magic.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending today. And thank you Sounding Board for sponsoring this webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, Diane. Bye-bye.
We thank you for a great webinar, but unfortunately, this concludes today's webinar. We thank you for attending. The recording will be available later today at webcast.td.org, and we will send all registrants an email with that link. Please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webinars at webcast.td.org/events. Goodbye.